Welcome to the MSDW Podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. On this episode, I talk with Eric Kimberling of Third Stage Consulting. As an independent advisor, Eric keeps his eye on multiple ERP solutions and vendors, so he sees the ERP selection and deployment process from a unique angle. We discuss the competitiveness of Dynamics 365 solutions compared to other vendors' cloud offerings, trends in project planning, and how buyers are dealing with their legacy IT investments in today's marketplace. All right, Eric Kimberling, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming back.
Well, thanks for having me.
So it's been about, I think, a year and a half since you were last here, and you're now at you formed a new company, Third Stage Consulting Group. Congratulations on that. Can you tell us a little bit about what the new business is like and what you're focused on now?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for that. Earlier this year, a group of us spun off from Panorama Consulting to form Third Stage Consulting, and really our purpose and goal is to do really what I've been doing for the 20 years that I've been in this industry, and 20 years of my career is helping clients define their digital strategies, help them select software, and more importantly, help them implement those solutions, including everything from Microsoft D365 to other types of solutions as well.
I think that's one of the, your focus sort of across various ERPs is one of the things that always makes it fun to hear from you, to read what you've been writing. And as always, you've been busy sort of publishing reports and writing blog posts about your thoughts on the state of the market and the state of various products. So I did want to touch on a few of those different topics here while I have you. One of the most talked about areas, looking specifically at the dynamic space and in Microsoft's efforts, and I know you're familiar with this right now, is getting to Dynamics 365, and there's a lot to talk about there. There's how partners are positioning what Dynamics 365 offerings are all about. In terms of the finance and operations for enterprise, the Business Central solution for the mid-market. There's a lot of discussion going on right now about upgrades for if you're an existing Dynamics AX or Dynamics Nav customer, and there's also the idea of migrations. If you're perhaps on GP or SL, there's the migration front. What are you seeing right now when you're thinking about the opportunity to either upgrade or migrate to Dynamics 365? Are you talking with clients about pros and cons? What kind of decisions are you helping them with?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's an interesting discussion because D365 has obviously come a long way, and it's sort of a revolutionary type of product that really takes the best of some of those different Microsoft Dynamics types of products that have been out there for quite some time, and kind of migrating them to a more modern cloud platform. And one of the biggest challenges that we help clients through is helping them understand, first of all, the maturity of the D365 product relative to the maturity of some of the other products that have been around for a lot longer in the Microsoft ecosystem. And that's one of the big talking points too is what am I really getting when I get D365? If I'm an AX user or a GP or a NAV user, what is it that I'm getting within D365 relative to what I have today? So that's one of the big discussion points is what does that jump look like? What kind of functionality am I really getting? The other part that a lot of clients are trying to work through is just am I really ready for a cloud solution? Am I really comfortable with that? And really just trying to educate them on the advantages of using a cloud solution. We still deal with clients that are still pretty comfortable having their on-prem solution and knowing that their data is within their four walls and everything. So really just trying to help clients understand the value of migrating to a cloud solution. So those are a couple of things that we're working through with clients and prospects right now.
Yeah. And what are you finding when you do comparisons? And maybe we should speak more specifically about a particular scenario, because I think different companies have different starting points. So for example, if you're talking to a company that's on a legacy version of AX, Dynamics AX for example, I don't know if that's a good one for you, saying, am I ready to go to D365 Finance and Operations, and am I ready to do it in the SaaS model, or I guess you could debate, is it exactly SaaS, but the Azure hosted, Microsoft hosted model of D365 finance operations from where I am today. Is that a scenario you're dealing with?
Yeah, just helping them kind of navigate what the path looks like, and I guess that's the good news and bad news with the Dynamics product in general is that you have options and you have flexibility, and with that comes decisions that need to be made, and clients oftentimes have trouble navigating those different options. And you gave a couple good ones there, a couple good options that clients have and need to consider. So part of it is just making sure they understand what their options are, and then the other part of it is helping them figure out what option is best for them, because there is no silver bullet, there's no easy answer in terms of what the right path for any given organization is.
When you have those conversations, are you finding the companies are fairly well educated if they're already bought into the Microsoft ecosystem, or is there a lot of learning to do when you start that discussion?
There's still a fair amount of learning to do. I mean, in general, obviously they're going to be a bit more educated than someone migrating from a non-Microsoft platform. But I think there's a lot of uncertainty or maybe a little bit of confusion around what exactly could I do? D365, what are my different options? And so, yes and no. I mean, they are more educated than non-Microsoft customers, but there's still a lot of learning that I think the ecosystem can do to ensure that people understand those options.
And so far, what kind of decisions have companies been making?
Well, most of them have been going with kind of the cloud D365 solution, but we still see some companies are trying to do kind of a hybrid approach to keep some of their applications on-prem and then migrate some of that to D365 in the cloud. So we're seeing a mix of both. In particular, we're seeing some of the companies that are doing the hybrid approaches are ones that operationally have difficulty migrating to the cloud. So they've got remote operations or international operations and maybe some developing countries without a good enough infrastructure to justify cloud in some of those locations. So you see some of those hybrid models, but outside of that, most of organizations that are going to a Microsoft product are going to D365 in the cloud from what we're seeing.
And in a lot of those cases, they're leaving some maybe legacy AX systems in place if it's global operations or multi-site operations, and then they're moving part of it and to the D365FO cloud option.
Yeah, that's correct.
All right, interesting. And my observation, it's not too scientific. I haven't really gathered too much primary data, but it seems like when you see use cases or case studies of companies that have gone with D365 in the cloud, it seems like a lot of the projects are shorter and they are sort of fairly limited in scope when the ones that are sort of publicly revealed either by partners or by Microsoft. And it seems like almost that seems to be a conclusion a lot of companies are reaching one way or another. I think Microsoft likes it to some degree, that they can say these projects are completing in shorter time spans than traditional ERPs have in the past, but I think also companies are lowering scope to sort of fit what they see as the best use of this system. It sounds like it's along the lines of what you're also finding.
Yeah, there's two pieces of that. I mean, one is that you're right that a lot of these companies are taking more of an incremental approach. They're not just lifting and shifting everything to D365 in the cloud all at once. They are kind of narrowing the scope and kind of focusing on the highest value areas of that shift. But the other part of that too is, in the research that I've done over the last 10 years of studying some of these kind of the broader trends in the industry and with different solutions, is typically Microsoft's Dynamics implementations historically have been done quicker than other types of solutions, whether it be SAP or Oracle or some other ERP systems. So generally, they're on the positive side of being done quicker when compared to other solutions. So I think those two factors combined are probably what you're seeing there in the market.
Do you find that some of these companies that are considering that our existing Microsoft customers are also saying, well, let's look at what else is out there. Let's look at some of the competitors. And I think, well, yeah, let me leave it there. Do you find that that's part of the conversation?
It's a good question. It's mixed. I mean, some do, some don't. I mean, it seems like with the Microsoft channel, it seems like companies are, and I don't base this on any sort of science, by the way, so this is just my qualitative assessment, but it feels like a lot of Microsoft customers are more loyal to kind of a Microsoft first type of strategy. So if they've been using NAV or GP or whatever for some extended period, it seems like, when I compare to other users of other types of systems, that they're less likely to want to go right away to go bid out, or get bids from other vendors, and instead kind of explore the Microsoft channel first. And that's kind of my finding. But having said that, you see a subset of customers that do want to see what's out there, especially with SAP making some progress in the same way with S4 HANA and their cloud solutions, and Oracle's doing the same. All the vendors are kind of doubling down on their cloud solutions right now. So it is kind of making for an interesting time for companies that are interested in looking for new software.
Yeah, I mean, there's different dynamics at play, I suppose you'd say. There's, to your point, I mean, there's these existing customers who have different degrees of sort of satisfaction with what they already have from SAP or from Microsoft or from Oracle or others, and those the vendors I think very much want to retain them, even as they're pursuing sort of net new opportunities as well. Is that common across vendors that they're trying to look both ways at the same time, trying to keep existing customers happy and get them upgraded to the latest while chasing or pursuing new business at the same time? Or do you feel like they're all sort of going with different strategies in that regard?
Yeah, I think they're going with different strategies. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of different types of VARs out there and resellers of Dynamics and the different suite of products. But yeah, I mean, I see a mix of both, honestly. Ones that are going after the existing customer base or existing Microsoft users, and ones that are going after other opportunities as well. There's still a lot of companies out there that are, believe it or not really using a modern ERP system. So they, things that a lot of customers have done 10 or 15 years ago to kind of migrate to a semi-modern post-Y2K solution. There's just still a fair number of companies out there that haven't even got to that step yet. So there's still plenty of new opportunities out there in addition to the existing Microsoft customers.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I was also interested to get your perspective on, since you do look across several ERPs fairly regularly, is some of the comparisons that you have done and some of the most recent maybe conclusions you've reached. I know you wrote recently about just the idea of choosing between SAP S4 HANA and Dynamics 365, for example, and the implications of that. Can you talk about what some of those implications are? Some of the most recent, findings or recommendations that you've been making based on your view into those two in particular.
Sure. So, I think the biggest thing when I look at comparing SAP and Microsoft is going to be flexibility. So I would generally advise companies that are looking for a greater degree of flexibility to look closely at Microsoft Dynamics and D365. On the flip side, if companies that are looking for maybe global companies that are trying to standardize and centralize their operations a little bit more, and maybe it's not that flexibility isn't important, but maybe it's not as important as standardization. That's generally where I'd say you might want to look closer at an SAP. Now, having said that, those are pretty broad generalizations, but just in terms of setting a general direction or understanding a general pro and con of a comparison, that's one thing I look at. The other is just when you look at the implementation time and costs and risk and just the overall business benefits, that's something else that needs to be considered too, because generally with the flexibility of D365 and the Microsoft suite of products, that becomes, the opportunity to make more incremental changes and maybe take lower risk types of implementations and more of a slow burn if needed. Whereas something like an SAP is generally gonna, you're kind of you're raising the stakes a bit, with an SAP implementation, in that you've got a little bit less flexibility, and you're generally going to be implementing across the entire organization faster. You're going to need to implement faster in order for the solution to work. So that's kind of the a couple of different things I look at when I'm comparing the two.
Another thing I'm curious about, maybe more generally, is it seems like companies are. I know you said there are some that are, still on much older legacy systems to handle ERP workloads, but companies do seem to be also paying attention, at least some of them, to sort of larger cloud strategy, or how cloud works into their overall IT budget, IT, sort of architectural stance. When you go into conversations with companies today, are you finding that you first have to get an understanding of where they are more broadly with investments in cloud, either the platforms they've already picked or other systems they've already invested in, and does that come into play more than it used to?
Yeah, that's a great point, great question, and I would say yes, that's definitely true, especially with the rise of Salesforce and Workday and some of these point solutions that are cloud based. You have more companies that maybe weren't ready to bite off an entire cloud ERP implementation, but they were willing to bite off a Salesforce CRM implementation or a Workday on the HCM or human capital side. So yeah, you do have these kind of, again, these hybrid or partial adoption types of customers that have kind of tested the water, so to speak, but they haven't yet gotten to that point where they're ready to take their core back office financials and operational system to the cloud. And that's what they're struggling with now is, okay, now how do we do that? How do we navigate the fact that maybe we've got Salesforce CRM and we want to keep it? How could those two systems potentially coexist?
How often does the decision end up with supporting some kind of hybrid model overall? Is that usually what happens? Are most companies mixed, or do you find that many are able to sort of standardize and say this is our cloud provider and everything we do is going to flow through them?
Well, it's sticking with that, the Salesforce CRM example. I mean, that's one of the Salesforce is one of the systems that is less likely to be replaced by an ERP system, generally because so many people use it and it has become somewhat of a CRM standard. But having said that, I mean, Microsoft does have a particularly strong CRM module within the Dynamics suite. So it's that's always a tough decision to make. Is you've got if you're going above D365, does it really make sense to keep a separate CRM solution, even though it's well known and a lot of people use Salesforce when D365 and Dynamics CRM are great CRM solutions that have quite a bit of functionality. So that's a pretty difficult decision, and there's no easy answer there. But we do see customers that go both directions, the full rip and replace, as well as the ones that want some of their existing systems to coexist.
It seems to me anyway that the integration, the market for integration strategy and integration solutions platforms has not slowed down. But maybe it's, if anything, it's actually perhaps accelerated. I don't have any data on that to pull from right now, but it still seems to be a very, very active sort of area of discussion, and an area where there's a lot of vendors, offering to smooth things out for companies. One of the things you do, obviously, and I think a lot of people know you and your work for this, is making recommendations and reports sort of on an annual basis. Are there any recommendations in the recent research you've been doing, or the recent writing you've been doing, or client work, where you see recommendations changing?
That's a good question. I think the biggest one is probably on the cloud side of things, and what I mean by that is I've typically been a bit of a, not a skeptic, but I haven't been as ready to jump on the cloud bandwagon until more recently. Now that the solutions are becoming a bit more refined and there's more options out there, it seems to be more viable. So, one thing that we're finding and one thing that's changing is that, cloud adoption is obviously continuing to increase among enterprise customers. But on the flip side of that, there's still just a lot of options. I mean, I can't recall a time, and I don't think there has been a time in my 20 years of doing this where there's been this many options and this many pretty big changes in the ERP space, all within a relatively small period of time. Having D365, hit the market relatively recently, along with S4 HANA on the SAP side, and then Oracle's got their cloud ERP suite. These are pretty major changes for the leading three vendors. Their flagship products are all evolving, kind of overhauled, all right around the same time. So that's probably the biggest change. And so along with that comes the need, perhaps more than ever, just to make sure you've got a deliberate strategy for what you want to accomplish, and making sure you've got a clear set of decision criteria for choosing the right system. And then most importantly, just making sure you've got a realistic and solid implementation strategy and plan to figure out how are you going to migrate over to this new solution over the next, X number of months or years. So those are probably some of the biggest findings we're finding here in the last several months and couple of years.
All right, interesting. And just to understand a little better, when you're working with a company on ERP selection, are you considered a partner with these vendors, or are you an independent firm?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's something I didn't mention in the intro about third stage consulting, but we are 100% independent. So we're not a Microsoft VAR or a VAR of anyone else for that matter. So really, we're just an independent partner to help to the clients, to help them figure out what the best strategy is for them, and to help them figure out how to make the transition to a new system, and kind of help them with their overall digital transformations.
All right. Yeah, makes sense. And, certainly a bit more caution on the value proposition of cloud, for example, sounds like the kind of thing someone who's independent would often recommend, I would guess, as opposed to a VAR.
Right.
One other thing I just wanted to ask you about before we end here is, is again, I think it's something you've written about quite a bit, but it's the idea of change management, and it's an ongoing, obviously it's not a new discussion, but the idea of, should organizations, and I think it's just as relevant now with a lot of cloud-based solutions sort of leading these discussions, should organizations be adopting processes that are sort of out of the box supported by the ERPs that they are selecting, rather than going toward the customization route and trying to fit the solution to the process that they want to see. Is that debate still going strong, or has it changed at all?
Yes. Yeah, it is still going strong. I don't know, honestly, that it's really changed. In my opinion, it hasn't really changed, despite all the technological changes in the space. My opinion has stayed pretty consistent on this, but I say every company is going to have two answers to that question. I think they're going to answer both ways for different processes. So they're going to look at different functional areas and different operational processes and prioritize them differently, or they should be prioritizing them differently. You're going to have your core foundational commodity type of business processes that you probably don't need or don't want to change significantly without just adopting what's offered out of the box. So, example would be your GL or accounts payable types of processes, where the software out there is pretty mature in those areas, and the functionality is going to be pretty strong. But then you're going to have other, call them more strategic core competencies, your secret sauce types of business processes, where those processes are going to be more likely to drive the software, and you need to make sure the software can conform to those processes, ideally without customization. But there's going to be cases where you may have to customize as well. So I'd say every company needs to look and kind of segment their business processes into those different categories to understand, here's the set of processes that we're just going to adapt to the out of the box functionality, and then these processes over here, yes, we'll use the out of the box functionality if we can, but we may need some kind of special configuration, or worst case scenario, some type of customization to make sure that we don't lose that secret sauce or lose that competitive advantage or that way of interacting with our customers that's so important to us as an organization.
That sounds reasonable. Cool. So before we end here, just thought I'd ask anything else that you want to call listeners' attention to, any upcoming reports or events you really have your eye on?
Yeah, I mean, we're always putting webinars out there. We're also getting ready to ramp up our schedule of in-person events. We're calling them some digital strategy type of workshops to help clients really evaluate and plan for and implement digital solutions. So those are some things. And then obviously, Dynamics has their series of events, or Microsoft has their annual conferences and whatnot they're always helpful to customers as well. So those are a few of the things that I've got my eye on.
Great. Well, Eric, it's always fun to have you joining me. It's always fun to talk about this stuff. Thanks so much for joining. Congratulations again on the new firm, and hope to have you back soon.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you, Jason. Thanks for having me.
This has been another episode of the MSDW Podcast. My thanks to Eric Kimberling of Third Stage Consulting for joining me once again. Feel free to send us feedback. You can reach me by email, jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World signing off.